had a few requests about how the new structure of the CASRs after the 2nd of December is going to influence the flight crew exam. So I just thought I'd give a little intro to the whole new raft of legislation that's due. The basic essence of it is that Part 91 replaces most of the CAOs and many of the CARs with a much more consolidated document. However, in relation to CASR 91, which is general operating rules for everybody, there's branch offs for specific conduction of flight like 121, which is large aircraft air transport operations, 135, which is smaller aircraft, aeroplane air transport operations, and 133, which is rotorcraft. Now, another of the changes is that following on from December, there'll be no distinction between charter and RPT. It's all passenger air transport if you're carrying passengers for hire or reward. Cargo air transport is also an air transport operation. So pretty much the only thing that won't be an air transport operation of some sort is private, which is going to be covered under Part 91, and aerial work, which has its own section of CASR 138. Now, at the moment, none of the CPL exams allow access to CASR 138 for aerial work. So the only exam questions you can get asked about are general operations and private under 91, air transport cargo or passengers in smaller aircraft under 135 or in larger aircraft, which pretty much means over 9 seats and 8.6 tonnes under CASR 121. Now, each of those have an associated MOS, a manual of standards. So pretty much the CASRs are like any other CASR you've had, which is relatively prescriptive. It just shows you in very basic terms what the regulations are. So this is 91 and tells you who it applies to and what you can do. But the MOS for 91 gives you much more detail about how to comply. So the MOS is like our means of compliance, much like the CAOs, and the CASA is very much like the old CAR, just telling you in very black and white terms what you can and can't do. One thing to take note of, which is fairly crucial, is that certain parts of Part 91, which is the general operation rules that are generally applicable, are overridden and superseded by sections of 121 or 135 for aeroplanes or 138 for aerial work. For example, the fuel under Reg 91455, there is a new fuel policy in the MOS of Part 91, which is very much like the old CAP 234. It's pretty much a direct lift from CAP 234. There might be future amendments. I've seen an unincorporated amendment of this that actually defines what a small aeroplane is, and it's basically sub 5,700, like up to 5,700 kilos, like it used to be. So I think there will be some fine tuning and tweaks of that, but that's pretty much our MOS fuel cap these days and the policy for that. However, that's overridden by transport operations. And one thing you'll notice is no variable reserve here for small aeroplanes for IFR or VFR, whereas in the CPL exam before, or previously for charter at least, we've had variable reserve for both charter and aerial work. Well, there was never any variable for private, and this is the private cap. But when you go to then Part 135, which is particularly covering air transport operations, and Part 135's MOS, it has its own little mini fuel cap. And in there, well, there you go, 10% of the trip fuel again. So there is a specific fuel cap for what would have been charter and RPT, but it's now simply air transport operations. So there's some changes like that that we'll have to take our little bit of time getting used to. But for air law, when you're not actually doing fuel computations, it's less critical. So you can see then Part 91 is the general operating rules that everyone has to operate within. And Part 91 has a MOS, which is where most of the CAOs ended up. Related to 91 is 119, which you don't have access to for any of the exams, which is really AOC holders. That's kind of like the old CAO 82, conditions on air operator certificates, and doing those sort of AOC holder type privileges. So Part 119 is not really related to pilots, so you don't get to take that with the exam. But branching off from that is CASA 121 for the big end of town, so aircraft over 9 seats and 8,616 kilos MTOW, so bigger than 5700 actually. There's a bit of a jump up for that. Small stuff, the smaller aeroplanes, which doesn't mean 5700 kilos, means less than 9 seats and less than 8,618 kilos, and aerial work. But you don't get to take the aerial work CASA with you into any of the flight crew exams. So if you have a look at what you're actually allowed to take with you, you can see that the permitted material for, go to the ATPLs here, for AALW, go right through this. This is off the CASA's website. To get balloon. So there we go. So for ATPL law after December, you'll be allowed to have still the whole car 88, which has gotten a lot smaller. There's still a few CARs in the 40 series, like 42, Zulu, November about maintenance, and there is some legacy CARs, but not very many. Good old 61 for licensing, which we've had in the exams for a few years already, but this new slew of CASA 91 and 91 mods, which is the bulk of the CAOs, moved over there, but also for transport operations, air transport, cargo or passengers in large aircraft, 121 and its mods, and 135 for smaller aircraft and the 135 mods, and good old 48.1 CAO as well. So that's the last CAO. That's the only legacy CAO. So really, the amount of documentation you'll need to take into the exam is actually a fair bit smaller than it used to be, because there's only a few old legacy CARs. Part 61 we've been taking in for a while anyway. 48.1 instrument 2019 we've been taking in for a while, but this is really the new draft, which is pretty much now the essence of the CAOs. And in large terms, they are the same rules, but they've just got new houses, new homes. There are some differences, and it does talk about the fact that the law, for example, fueling requirements have changed. There is some changes to the distances and the specifications of how refueling has to be done. So the 6 meters from buildings and the 15 meters from open hangars, those sorts of old rules have been streamlined and consolidated. So that's mentioned there. Class of operations, of course, there's no charter RPT anymore. It's all air transport. It's either passenger air transport or cargo air transport or private under 91 or aerial work, but you don't have access to that. They've relaxed firearm rules in a way, just formalising some of the arrangements. Still needing pilot and command position permission and not being able to discharge unless you're operating under special approval. Weather radar requirements and ground ops, that's changed slightly. And there's some new transitional arrangements for TORs, which is your terrain awareness and warning systems, and cockpit voice and flight data recorders. Oxygen's changed a little bit in terms of the level you can fly to without supplemental oxygen in unpressurized aircraft. So that replaces the old oxygen CAO. There's a bit of difference in CAO 20.7.1 Bravo, which has moved over to MOS of 121 in terms of certification for large aircraft, and there are a few singles that made it into 121 as well, certain specified single engine airplanes. Mostly it's twins in 121, but a few of the larger turbine singles made it into 121. They've introduced an approach ban for IFR. If the RVR is consistently down below the minimum for the approach, you can't even commence an approach. And a few little changes of alternates. But yeah, 121 overrides some of the 91 requirements, either partially or completely. And ELTs, there's some changes as well. So it's not, it's not catastrophic, but there's significant changes to law, which I've been writing new questions about. And it's a similar amount of differences to CPL law as well. Fortunately, at ATPL level, that's pretty much the main change, but you can see for ATPL, nothing in systems, nothing in planning, nothing in human factors or MET or NAV, but loading is the other one that comes in for a bit of mention. And the 20.7.1 Bravo CAO, which used to be the certification standard for aircraft over 5,700 is now simply moved over to the MOS of 121. And it is a little bit different, so I'm rewriting some of the new material for performance and loading because of obstacle clearance and drift down requirements changing very slightly. And V-speeds and gradients, there's a few little minor changes. It's not anywhere near the magnitude of change that it is for law, but performance and loading will have a rewrite at ATPL level. Other than that, that's really it. There's nothing else in ATPL that gets affected. Planning as it was, systems as it was, human factors as it was, net as it was. There's no such thing as provisional forecasts. And math as it was. But so really it's law and performance and loading. So I'm in the middle of writing the new material, and that will be available probably realistically not until early New Year. So if you haven't done law yet, either do it in the next couple of weeks before December 2nd, or maybe just shelve it. And it's quite likely, CASA have said that phasing will be gradual, and they have noted that it won't be, a huge slew. It'll be a phase in gradually, and they're not going to go, too hard too soon, as a gradual introduction, and not dump it all on the industry all at once. So I think probably early on in the piece, it won't be too bad. I think they'll be treading relatively softly. CASA have produced a lot of assistance material, like they've produced a mapping document that shows you what would have been in the CAOs in times past, like removal of locking and safe devices, pre-flight safety precautions in 20.2. That's now moved over, and they tell you where it's moved. It's moved to CASA 91.245. And so these mapping documents are quite helpful in being able to chase down where some of those rules have moved to and where their new home is, like oxygen as well. That's moved over to the oxygen section of MOS 91 and 91 CASR as well. So this is the CASR of 91 and the MOS, if there's a MOS reference to that as well. And if there's provisions of big aircraft and little aircraft and rotorcraft, there's reference to that as well in those companion sections. But sometimes if you're doing air transport operations, that supersedes the 91 regs, and you've got to go straight to the relevant section of your 135 or your 121 CASR or manual standard. So it is going to take a little bit of getting our head around as to where to go. But the question is going to be quite specific about it. It'll say, okay, well, you're doing private operations, in which case 121 and 135 have nothing to do with you. It's only 91 and 91 MOS, because general operating flight rules apply to everybody. But if you're doing air transport operations, and if there's a section in 135 or 121 that is mentioning rules, they override the 91 rules, which are just generally designed for your private, non-commercial operators. So that's just a little bit of a brief overview. The end consequence of me having a look at this for a couple of weeks now is I don't think it's going to be catastrophic. It will be a new change, obviously, and take a bit of getting used to, but nothing that we can't deal with. And as I said, mostly new homes for old rules, but a few changes, particularly in relation to law, as we see there. And those are the main ones there. So it's not all bad news. And fortunately, flight planning completely quarantined from that in ATPL, and all the other ATPL systems quarantined in large part. Just a very small change to net with the reduction or removal of provisional forecasts. But yeah, performance and loading are a major topic. But I'll have that new material out ready to go fairly early in